Welcome to this explainer. Okay, just take a quick second and look around you. The walls, the windows, the concrete beneath your feet. Today, we're diving into the massive industries that literally build our modern world. But more importantly, we're going to explore exactly how we standardize and measure their sustainability. We are going to decode the rather complex architecture of accountability that Wall Street and global regulators use to track the real-world environmental and social impacts of the materials that surround us every single day. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. SICS and construction materials. 2. The environmental footprint. 3. Resource and land management. 4. Workforce health and safety. And finally, 5. Innovation and market integrity. Basically, we're moving from a very broad, macro-level framework all the way down into some highly specific granular metrics. Let's get right into it.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, SICS and construction materials, the macro system.
To start, we really have to ask a foundational question. How do we actually accurately measure corporate sustainability? Because for a long time, let's be honest, corporate reporting was basically the Wild West. Everyone was using totally different metrics, making it virtually impossible for investors to compare companies side by side. The market was desperately screaming for a standardized, comparable way to just cut through all the chaos. Well, the solution to that chaos comes from the SASB standards, which are now under the stewardship of the IFRS Foundation. They provide the ultimate benchmark. These standards lay out specific, industry-based guidance so companies know exactly what sustainability-related risks and opportunities could realistically affect their cash flows, their access to finance, and their cost of capital. And to keep all this massive data organized, the system relies on SICS. That's the Sustainable Industry Classification System. You can kind of think of SICS like the Dewey Decimal System for a giant global library of corporate sustainability. Instead of grouping companies just by what they sell, it categorizes them into really neat boxes based entirely on their shared sustainability-related risks and opportunities. It essentially becomes the exact lens through which every single piece of data is evaluated. So if SICS is our giant library, today we're walking straight over to the Extractives and Minerals Processing Sector section. Within that specific sector, we pull out the industry book titled Construction Materials, and the exact standard code stamped on the spine of that book, EMCM. That alphanumeric code, EMCM, is the precise standardized bucket that global markets use to classify the entire construction materials industry. So what exactly falls inside that EMCM bucket? We are talking about the literal building blocks of society here. Companies in this category produce cement, aggregates, glass, plastic materials, insulation, bricks, and roofing. Seriously, like I said earlier, take a look around the room you're sitting in right now. Chances are almost everything keeping the roof over your head and the walls around you originated from an EMCM categorized company. Moving right along to Section 2, the environmental footprint, air and energy. Producing these foundational materials, especially cement, wow, it generates absolutely massive direct greenhouse gas emissions. Companies have to report their gross global Scope 1 emissions in metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. To put the sheer scale of this into perspective, if the global cement industry were a country, it would literally be the third largest carbon emitter in the world. Because cement kilns and their associated chemical processes are just so incredibly carbon intensive, this industry is highly exposed to the financial impacts of emissions regulations and carbon pricing. Tracking this single metric under EMCM is absolutely vital for investors. But, it's not just about greenhouse gases. The standard actually demands a really rigorous accounting of localized air pollutants. Oxides of nitrogen, sulfur dioxides, particulate matter, hazardous compounds like dioxins, and even heavy metals like lead and mercury. These emissions mostly come from on-site fuel combustion and production processes, and they have significant localized human health and environmental impacts. So managing these pollutants isn't just a good for the planet thing. It actually helps companies avoid regulatory penalties and much higher operating expenditures down the road. Now, all of those emissions, they're deeply tied to some truly immense energy demands. The EMCM standard requires companies to break down their energy consumption sources, like how much is coming from the standard electricity grid, how much is from renewables like wind or solar, and, fascinatingly, what percentage comes from alternative fuels. Believe it or not, cement kilns actually use alternative fuels like scrap tires, spent solvents, and waste oils. Yes, you heard that right. Old tires power the creation of our buildings. If managed properly, this can significantly lower energy costs and emissions, but it obviously requires highly careful tracking to ensure they aren't just releasing even more harmful pollutants into the air.
Okay, Section 3, Resource and Land Management.
Making construction materials requires a massive volume of water, but there's a supercritical distinction in how this water is actually measured. Companies must report both water withdrawn, which is the total water they pull from the ground, rivers, or municipalities, and water consumed, which is the water that actually evaporates or gets directly incorporated into the final product and never returns to the source. This specific distinction is especially critical for operations located in regions with high or extremely high baseline water stress, where water scarcity poses a huge operational and, frankly, reputational risk. Then, of course, we've got solid waste. Under the EMCM standard, entities track the total metric tons of waste generated, the percentage that is strictly hazardous, and the percentage successfully recycled. A massive regulatory focus here is on cement kiln dust, or CKD. It's this fine-grained, solid, highly alkaline byproduct. Companies that effectively recycle these byproducts can drastically reduce their litigation risks and operating costs. And honestly, we absolutely cannot discuss land management without talking about biodiversity. Materials producers operate their own massive quarries, which requires them to clear vegetation, blast, and crush underlying stone deposits. You can't just carve out a mountain and walk away, right? This permanent landscape alteration is heavily scrutinized. The key ECM metric holds companies accountable by comparing the total terrestrial land area actively disturbed by quarries against the percentage of that specific area that has been actively restored to assist the recovery of the local ecosystem. Pivoting a bit now for Section 4, Workforce Health and Safety. Operating heavy machinery, blasting rock in quarries, it carries significant risk. And sadly, this industry has historically seen higher mortality rates. The standard forces transparency by requiring companies to report their total recordable incident rate, as well as their near-miss frequency rate. And what's really important here is that they can't just report this for their direct full-time employees. They must report it equally for third-party contract employees as well. You literally cannot hide safety issues just by outsourcing the dangerous jobs. There's also a very specific chronic health condition that gets closely tracked under EMCM, and that is silicosis. It's a severe lung disease caused by inhaling dust containing crystalline silica, which is a hazard common when you're crushing stone all day. Tracking this ensures companies are heavily incentivized to utilize proper respiratory programs, engineering controls, and safety training to protect their workers' long-term health. All right, bringing it home with Section 5, Innovation and Market Integrity. So sustainability isn't just about mitigating the bad stuff, right? It actually represents a massive financial opportunity. This innovation metric tracks the percentage of a company's revenue that comes from products qualifying for sustainable building design certifications, like LEED or BREEAM. Creating resource-efficient products, materials that actively reduce energy, water, or material impacts during usage, is a huge driver for long-term growth and market competitiveness. But of course, market success has to be achieved fairly. The construction materials market has, historically speaking, faced some real issues with anti-competitive behavior. So the standard mandates the reporting of total monetary losses resulting from legal proceedings tied to cartel activities, price fixing, or antitrust activities. Business disruptions and major legal fines for manipulating prices are a material risk to investors, making governance and pricing integrity a completely crucial piece of the overall sustainability puzzle. Which brings us to the end of our explainer today, and I want to leave you with a rather provocative question to consider. As consumer and regulatory pressures continue to mount, will sustainable building certifications completely redefine the construction materials market? As we've seen today, the EMCM standard gives us exactly the data we need to track that evolution, from the stone in the quarry right to the walls around us. Thanks for joining me to decode the architecture of accountability and keep looking closely at the world we're building.